Gary just put a triumphant end to forced labor within his company's supply chain. Now, his only kryptonite is the office candy bowl. Save your company's operations and reputation with Exiger.
A dive deeper into the potential impacts of the newest presidential administration. This time, the impact on America's supply chain. A sit down with Brandon Daniels, CEO at the logistics company Exiger.
Sharon saved her supply chain from cyber risk and ended the office goat debate.
Brandon Daniels is CEO of Exiger, which helps businesses and supply chain manage all of those issues. He is also in Davos. You've been speaking, I'm sure, to many, many clients, CEOs, etc. What's the number one question you're getting right now?
The number one question is, what is the current trade warfare going to look like over the next 60, 90, 120 days? Everyone wants to understand what the major superpowers of the world are going to do to rebalance their economies and to rebalance the global position, their global position against the complete landscape. So as you saw, early at the sort of end of last month, you saw where China rolled out export control bans on antimony and germanium and gallium. You're seeing the United States talk about major tariffs against China and Mexico. Everyone here at Davos is wondering about the potential business implications of this continued trade warfare between the two major consumers and innovators and business manufacturers of the world.
So the fact that we also have no idea how it's going to work out, what do you tell your clients about supply chain issues? I mean, if you haven't moved production or diversified production by now, what are you waiting for?
Yeah, I think there are three things to consider. Look, this isn't just about tariffs and about moving manufacturing back to the United States from a Trump administration policy perspective. I think there are really three things that they're trying to accomplish. The first thing, and you can see this in sort of the pause as they start to evaluate the tariffs that they're going to actually execute. One, they want to make sure that they're putting tariffs against areas where the United States could have competitive advantage. There's not a huge difference between real estate in Peoria, Illinois, and real estate in, Hebei, China. And so the one thing is, where are there jobs where automation, where AI, where robotics can essentially neutralize the labor arbitrage between the two countries and put the United States in a competitive advantage. The second thing that they're looking at is, where do we have intellectual property that we want to keep? And so I'd imagine that these tariffs are going to continue to focus on the areas where we want to be competitive, whether that's in electrification of vehicles, or it's in quantum computing, or it's in advanced microchips and AI. And then the last thing I think you're going to see are areas where we want to make sure that how our U.S. companies are being treated by China is not different than the way that Chinese companies are being treated by China. Right now, you have a number of companies in the U.S. that can only source certain metals, certain components, certain materials from China. And they have a distinct advantage and huge economic advantages versus the United States companies that have to source them directly from China and have to pay tariffs against them, where China has sort of economic manipulation that can be employed.
I am curious, though, Brandon, because when we talk about the challenges on the supply chain, obviously it's not just about whatever percentage tariffs and where they go to. There are also some more sort of, I guess, practical or more sort of pedestrian issues that supply chain folks are going to have to deal with. And one of those is, quite frankly, are just trade routes. There's been, I don't know exactly what the president is talking about, but he seems to think that control over the Panama Canal should somehow revert back to the United States and out of Panama's control, whether that could ever happen. But I am curious that, do folks need to start thinking about these things as well, that sort of the traditional routes, the traditional sort of trade of physical barriers, if you will, could be shifted in a way that we haven't seen in decades?
Well, the thing, Romaine and Alex, there are a lot of issues with our existing logistics infrastructure, and we've seen it play out over and over and over again. Our ports are not resilient against many of the major storms and many of the major natural disasters that have happened. There are sweeping issues with labor. And obviously, then there's geopolitical tensions that erupt into chaos, like with the Houthis. And so I think what the administration is looking at is how do we relieve and resolve some of our contested logistics, which is one of the biggest problems that we have, is that our logistics are actually contested by adversaries or by new potential disruption types. And so, understanding what's going to be possible within our existing trade routes and what those relationships might be with, for instance, Panama, we're going to have to see how they evolve. I'm going to be meeting with the president of Panama here in Davos tomorrow as we're going through our meetings with world leaders and business leaders. And, one of the things I'm hoping to hear is how do we plan to improve the infrastructure, the economic relationships, so that we can actually continue to advance the mission that we have, which is to make the supply chains work again, which they have not been.
Yeah. We only have about 30 seconds, Brandon, but I am curious. The President of the United States is expected to address Davos as well, virtually, not physically. I am curious as to what you think leaders there want to hear out of him.
I think they want to hear that he's looking to do deals, right? I think they want to hear that this is not about a rigid set of hard lines. I think they want to hear that the United States is open for business, and that's the optimistic view. For the first time ever, there is a USA house here in Davos. There's always been an India house, there's always been a Brazil house, there's always been a Japan house. For the first time ever, we set up a USA house here, and that's because what we're hoping is we're coming to the rest of the world and saying, we're open for business, but it's going to be fair and it's going to be balanced.
All right, Brandon, really appreciate you taking time for us. Brandon Daniels out in Davos. He is the CEO of Exiger, a conversation about the supply chain issues that could arise here in the new Trump administration, a Trump administration that has wasted no time here in rolling back some of the previous administration's goals and targets.